Welcome to Session 9 in Foundations in Global Health. In Session 9, we're going to be moving to discuss hot topics in global health. And the first topic we'll be discussing will be climate change. Climate change is a significant topic in global health because it affects every single individual around the globe. In this session, we're going to talk about the examples of climate change and some of the issues that are surrounding climate change. The summer of July 2021 was one of the hottest summers recorded. There was extreme heat and significantly a lot of wildfires. I'm going to show several videos showing the amount of wildfires and extreme weather that occurred not only within the United States but also around the world. This article was featured in National Geographic, which basically encapsulates sort of all of what occurred this summer, in which it talks about how this summer could really change our understanding of extreme heat. Unfortunately, this is not going to be the last time we're going to experience extreme heat in the United States and around the globe due to climate change. In the summer of 2021, there were several wildfires, but the first small wildfire that emerged as a large wildfire was actually the Bootleg wildfire. And this is an article from the New York Times, which talks about this wildfire that started in Oregon and at that time became one of the largest wildfires in Oregon, and discusses the efforts that went into trying to contain this wildfire. So, this is one of the significant wildfires that occurred. And in fact, the next clip in the next slide, I'm going to show a video depicting all the actions that went into trying to contain this bootleg wildfire and in how this bootleg wildfire actually affected weather within the United States from the West Coast into the East Coast.
The extreme heat and ongoing drought in the West are combining to make for a very difficult fire season. Wildfires are burning earlier than usual in some places. It's also led to evacuations as firefighters try to contain ever larger fires in sweltering heat, with temperatures hitting the triple digits in some cases. William Brangham, who's just back from reporting out west, has our update.
Judy, the federal agency that tracks wildfires reports that more than 65 major fires in western states that have burned close to 1 million acres so far. More than half are located in Arizona, Idaho, and Montana. In Northern California, large blazes are burning in the Sierra Nevada hills and forests and right near the Nevada border. Thousands of homes have been evacuated. The largest fire in the country right now is in southern Oregon. It's known as the Bootleg Fire. It's already burned more than 150,000 acres. That's an area twice the size of Portland. There are 2 other smaller but still significant fires in the state as well. We look at the state of the situation there with Rich Tyler. He's with the Oregon State Fire Marshal's Office. Rich Tyler, very good to have you on the NewsHour, especially amidst what you're dealing with right now. Can you just give us a sense of the Bootleg Fire we know has been doubling in size every couple of days. This sounds like an awful thing you all are having to deal with. What is it like right now? What are conditions like?
Currently at the Bootleg Fire, they are reporting 201,923 acres that are burned and 0% containment.
0%?
Yes.
And what does that mean for firefighters who are trying to get their hands around this?
It means that we are looking at all possible tactics and strategies to not only give a little bit of direction to the fire, but primarily protect lives and homes. and infrastructure. There is a major power line that runs through the middle of that fire that's headed south to California.
And do you have a sense of the kinds of structures and homes and communities that might be in the line?
Yes, let's see. We have approximately 1,926 homes that are threatened, with 21 that have already been destroyed. And we have 54 other structures, outbuildings, that have already been destroyed. And those are the ones we know of. We will continue to assess and look at, but that's a slower process because our priority is saving lives, protecting homes, and values.
And what about for the firefighters themselves? I mean, I can't imagine what it's like dealing with something, one, of that size, but also in those conditions. I know it's been incredibly hot out there.
Yes, and the fire, typically fires have a fire front. It goes in a direction, which allows us to anchor from the start of the fire area, work along the flanks, and work our way to the front of the fire. The unique characteristic that the Bootleg fire has, if you look at it on the infrared maps, there is no one fire front. In fact, at times there is three or a horseshoe shaped fire front, which means your flanks are very limited.
It is still relatively early in the summer. For you guys to be fighting something as big and ferocious as this in July, I mean, what is that? Is that this ongoing drought, the heat? What is that?
I think it's all of it. I was talking to our administrator, and we haven't deployed a task forces under the State Fire Marshal's Office under a Conflagration Act prior to July 15th, ever.
Ever?
Ever. So now we are at July 13th, and we've had 5 conflagrations already in the state of Oregon.
Is there any sense from the forecast do you have any potential relief in sight from Mother Nature helping you out?
Right now, all the weather systems or the weather experts are telling us we're going to get more of the same. Stability for us wildland and structural firefighters when it comes to weather is good news. It's when the weather changes, the wind direction changes, the temperature spike, the relative humidity drop, and it changes drastically in a small window that it becomes more dangerous.
We know that human-caused ignition is a major driver of these kinds of fires. Is it your sense that people have gotten a better sense of controlling their own behavior with sparks and cigarettes and campfires and things like that, and done a better job of defending their homes and properties in case fire comes? Has that improved?
Absolutely. In 2020, 70% of Oregon's wildfires were human-caused. 70%. That means we have an opportunity to really push the education while people are aware of, while our citizens are aware of the devastation the wildfires can have. And people want to get out of their homes. They want to get out of their isolation. They're headed back out in the wilderness. And they're headed out to the parks, and they're headed out to where the forests are. Well, when you take people that may never have been in the forest or haven't been in the forest a long time, they're having to relearn or learn for the first time. How do you be smart? How do you be responsible for your actions to reduce the chance of ignition of wildfires?
All right, Rich Tyler with the Oregon State Fire Marshal's Office, thank you very much for being here, and we wish you the best of luck out there.
Thank you so much, William.
So here is a headline from CNN showing that the Bootleg fire in Oregon is so large that it's creating its own weather. And this was from July 20th, 2021. And here is actually a video from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, which shows a satellite image of the Bootleg fire. And what it's going to show here is actually the number of acres burning, and the number of acres actually expand starting from early July to the middle of July. And as the number of acres expand, you can see that more acres burn, more smoke is being produced, and actually the weather changes around the Oregon fire. the Bootleg fire. So you can see here's the fire. 111,000 acres are being burned. July 9th, 38,000. July 10th, 76,000. July 11th, 143,000. July 12th, 150,000 acres. And look at the plume of smoke that's being created. July 13th, over 200,000. And Matt, look at the weather. July 14th, 220,000. And it became, at that time, the largest wildfire in the United States. So that shows that in terms of wildfires, the amount of heat and smoke that's being generated can actually create its own weather and significantly impact not people in the area, actually people across different parts of the United States, which I'll show you in another video. In addition, another headline from CNN showed that the picture here, which showed the perimeter of the Bootleg fire as of July 22, 2021, actually showed that the Bootleg fire was so huge that it was burning, that the fire was actually burning up the carbon offsets in terms of what had been done. So in fact, when we have these significant wildfires due to climate change, all that we are putting in terms of the work, in terms of carbon offsets, in terms of trying to mitigate climate change, those are being significantly impacted because of these wildfires, which are due to also climate change. So in many ways, much of the things that we're doing are also unfortunately being impacted negatively. In the United States, we experienced significant wildfires in the West in terms of the Bootleg fires and several other wildfires. However, in other parts of the globe, people also experienced significant weather anomalies. For example, in Europe, they experienced a lot of flooding. In Western Europe, for example, flooding occurred that killed over 100 people, as depicted in this ABC News story at the time. In addition, flooding occurred in China and other parts of the world. The next news clip that I'm going to show from NBC News, dated July 21st, actually summarizes much of the significant catastrophes that occurred around the globe in the month of July, both within the United States and around the globe and around the world, all encapsulated within 1 week, just showing sort of the chaos that occurred because of climate change.
Tonight, new worries about the spread of the Delta variant, a controversial study raising concern about the effectiveness of the Johnson & Johnson COVID vaccine as the battle over vaccinating healthcare workers heats up, with so many still not protected, and with hospitals over investigating the Capitol riot. Back now with those intense wildfires in the West, the smoke reaching as far as here in New York. Just one example of the ravages of climate change being felt as never before, and it's getting worse. Here's Miguel Almaguer.
Burning hotter, faster, and more explosive than ever before, tonight wildfires in the West are threatening homes and lives. Firefighters say what's unfolding here is more than one disaster feeding off another. Historic drought is the perfect fuel for these epic conditions. But it's climate change creating infernos larger than ever, with vortex of smoke powerful enough to spawn their own weather systems. The unimaginable is becoming routine.
We're seeing hot days and heat waves like we've never seen before. And then the winds, it's just a formula for disaster.
Fire Chief Brian Fennessy and his crew say what's already been lost is devastating, but what's still at risk is mind-boggling.
These fires are moving with such speed that it's exceeding all of the models that we've used for decades when trying to gauge fire spread. We hear it all the time from citizens is, I didn't think the fire was going to get here that quickly.
While extreme conditions aren't new, the intensity and duration is. This year, Texas was buried under historic snow and ice. Tropical storms and hurricanes are forming earlier in the season. Catastrophic floods are becoming routine. And as cool climates record record heat, 94% of the West is in drought, with 64% in the critical category of extreme drought.
The long-term impacts of climate change are largely unknown, and so we do expect increased heat and increased incidence of fire. But what's important is to monitor these changes so that we can be prepared for future impacts.
Scientists say greenhouse gases must be reduced as a start to the solution.
It would be very difficult to go back in time and return the greenhouse gas levels to the level that they were 50 years ago. I do think it's important to not lose hope, to consider that we still have options.
Tonight, as scorching fires burn the West, toxic smoke drifts thousands of miles and chokes the East. The sun tainted red in its soupy haze, our planet's beauty and its peril in one.
Miguel, as we push into summer, wildfires and their explosive growth are the big concern now.
Yeah, Kate, this hillside is what so much of the West looks like. If a fire ripped through here, it would destroy this area in a matter of minutes. Last year, there were more than 22 major disasters connected to climate change and weather. The price tag, more than $121 billion. Kate?
Wow, an unbelievable picture there. Another weather disaster to tell you about. Dozens are dead in China tonight after unprecedented flooding brought on by torrential rains, some losing their lives in subways as they filled with water. Janice Mackey-Freyers in China with late details.
Tonight, stunning scenes in a subway in central China. Passengers trapped inside flooded train cars, posting horrifying videos to social media. My phone will run out of power soon, she says. The water rising higher, others clinging to handles. It took hours for rescuers to reach them. A dozen people didn't make it out alive. Across the city of Zhengzhou, people were stranded. Kids floated out of a kindergarten in plastic bins. Nearly a year's worth of rain falling in just 3 days, what forecasters called a once-in-a-thousand-years event. The torrential rain has forced 100,000 people to relocate as China's army scrambles to shore up dams now at risk of bursting.
This catastrophic flooding adds to a grim roster of extreme weather across the globe, what scientists link to climate change, and there is more rain in the forecast. Kate?
Janice, thank you. A battle in Congress tonight.
Given the previous videos, we all know that climate change affects humans, but we are also aware that climate change affects animals and plants. This story from the National Geographic just shows the example that sweltering heat and extreme heat fluctuations triggers massive die-offs, and specifically talks about one specific example of baby hawks. But we know that this occurs for fish and other wildlife and plants. So as the globe continues to warm, we're going to see a change in flora and fauna, in which some animals will continue to have significant depopulation, where others will continue to increase in population. So, for example, mosquitoes. Some mosquitoes do not thrive or exist in cold climates, but as the climate continues to warm, for example, we will start seeing mosquitoes in warmer and colder climates where they previously do not exist. And when we see mosquitoes in those climates, we will see mosquito-borne diseases that are not normally in northern climates. For example, West Nile virus and some of these other vector-borne diseases that we would not normally see. So this is the unfortunate, unintended consequences of climate change. When we talk about climate change, we have to talk about greenhouse gases because greenhouse gases are significant contributors to global warming and climate change. So when we look at greenhouse gas emissions, we can look and see what are the contributors to greenhouse gas emissions. Well, electricity in terms of heat production is about 30%. Livestock is about 15%. Transportation in terms of cars, planes, and other trains and other modes of transportation makes up 15%. Manufacturing construction make up 13%. Other fuel combustion makes up 9%, and other forms of, which is a catch-all, make up about 18%. So together, these make up about 99.99%, or the majority of greenhouse gas emissions by sectors. We can also look at the companies that contribute to carbon dioxide and methane in terms of greenhouse gases that contribute to global warming. These are all, of course, petroleum-based companies based in different countries. All of these, starting with Saudi Aramco, actually contribute about 4.3% in terms of both carbon dioxide and methane, followed by Gazprom. So these companies actually produce at least a significant amount of hydrocarbons to global warming, to the warming of the environment. And the other companies only produce about 65%. Finally, we can also look at the annual greenhouse emissions for the 10 major economies. So this is basically looking at the data based on contributions per country. And in fact, what we can see is that different countries actually have different amounts that they contribute per greenhouse emission. So looking at from 1990 to 2018, we can see that different countries have contributed different amounts. So for example, China has increased in terms of its greenhouse contributions. The United States has remained the same. The European Union has decreased, and also India has continued to increase in terms of greenhouse emissions. And some countries have basically plateaued, whereas other countries has basically are starting to increase. So this is basically an interesting chart. So in this way, many countries, for example, India and other countries and low and middle income countries, are starting to move forward an agenda to move into becoming more industrialized, and they need to move their economy and from a more agrarian economy to an industrial economy. Most countries, basically all countries that have done this via the old way in terms of utilizing hydrocarbons, and have done this by emitting a large amount of greenhouse gases. Now the argument is that rich countries want these countries, low and middle income countries, to cut back on their greenhouse emissions. For example, most countries in Africa and in other parts of the world that are classified as low and middle income countries hardly emit any greenhouse gases. In order for them to industrialize, they will have to emit greenhouse gases. However, rich countries do not want them to emit greenhouse gases. So the countries in low and middle income countries feel that they have a right to industrialize and utilize whatever resources they have and should not be lectured to by rich countries who used their means to industrialize by polluting. And this has become the crux of the argument because at the end of the day, rich countries are trying to stop poor or low and middle income countries from industrializing by emitting carbons, while many of them still continue to emit greenhouse gases. So climate change is occurring, and it will change how we live and how the future will be. Right now, what we see is that in terms of what the viable wheat production is in terms of 2021, this is depicted here within the US here as the yellow. Depending on how extreme climate change is, and based on basically NBC News in terms of the extreme heat that has occurred in 2021, and depending on what models you use, viable wheat production could be significantly shifted northward in terms of being here in the blue in Canada. So this would be a significant shift in terms of where you would only have viable farmland here in terms of wheat production and other significant agriculture. Moreover, the previous slide showed how wheat production will change in the U.S. depending on how climate change affects certain parts of the United States. However, sources of water will also change. So, for example, in terms of in Africa, the border between Nigeria, Niger, Chad, and Cameroon, Lake Chad, there has been significant changes in terms of sources of water drying up. So Lake Chad has changed from 1972, the boundaries of the lake compared to 2018. This has caused significant changes in terms of water sources and livelihood, which is a significant problem for those individuals that have relied or lived on Lake Chad for hundreds of years. Although the global body, meaning the United Nations, has still not put forth a strong standard in terms of addressing climate change, individuals, countries, and states, and even companies are acting because they see that climate change is a significant issue. For example, over 70 countries have now tougher nationally determined contributions and in terms of climate plans, which occurred in 2020. More money has been allocated toward programs like the United Nations Green Climate Fund. Moreover, many consortiums of pension funds, insurance companies have pledged with over 2.3 trillion under management has pledged to end all investments in carbon-intensive industries by middle of the century. And in fact, many companies will not do business with carbon-intensive industries. The Gates Foundations have announced $790 million to help small-scale farmers adapt to climate change. You have also 16 young climate activists announced a new international petition to the UN on the rights of the child to name climate change as a crisis for children's rights. 30 countries, 22 states, and 21 companies committed to ending reliance on coal. And in fact, in the United States, you have other lawsuits that have been in the courts, working their way through the courts in terms of children, similar to the UN, in terms of children, basically forcing the government to petition it to say that climate change is a crisis specifically on behalf of children. Although governments have been reluctant to really act on climate change, corporations have been very willing to move forward on a robust agenda on climate change over the last decade. And in fact, corporate initiatives around climate change have proliferated in the US and around the world. The main reason being that corporations stand to lose in terms of climate change. For example, their infrastructure, their crops, their labor costs, their productivity, all of these are at risk because climate change presents significant uncertainty and risk and can significantly impact the cost of doing business. So companies, including multinational companies like Walmart, Google, Dell, Facebook, etc., are committed to emissions reduction and see the benefit in terms of climate change. And in fact, they are working with their regulators, their supply chain, and other companies to make sure that they can at least work with like-minded individuals to address climate change in the best way they can see how to ultimately address their bottom line, which is basically a return on investment for their investors and keep costs low. In this way, they are bypassing government gridlock so that at the end of the day, they can always keep an eye on their most important asset, which is a return on investment and keeping their production costs low. So by no means is this ultimately an altruistic endeavor, but this is an endeavor in terms of corporate viability, because ultimately, for a corporation to survive in a climate in which there is uncertainty, a corporation must understand the risk and must address those risks head on. So, although we know that climate change is a significant problem, there are a lot of reasons for inaction. And here are some of the reasons, just a few. And there are actually more reasons beyond what is listed here. So, for example, many economies are heavily based on energy sources that emit greenhouse gases. So, most economies are either oil-based or coal-based in terms of the energy sources. So emitting or eliminating oil or coal or fossil fuels from your economy is a very tough sell for I would say 99.99% of politicians. Moreover, no single country or political party is responsible for action, which is basically the UN system. So everybody can basically deny responsibility. Moreover, many effects of climate change are distant from most people. The problem is seen by some as an environmental issue, basically not their problem. And can be a polarizing issue which is split among political lines, and many see it as also political lines in terms of environmental issues too. And in fact, because it is based on our economies are based on fossil fuel, acting on climate change presents a trade-off between short-term and long-term benefits. So do we make some short-term sacrifices for long-term benefits? Many people are not willing to make those short-term sacrifices for the long-term benefits. And last but not least, the future is always more uncertain than the present. And enacting policies today to cut greenhouse gas emissions won't have a discernible impact on global warming for decades, if not centuries. So that is a significant issue. And there is a lot of controversy or disagreement in terms of what impact it could have. And people argue that sometimes we shouldn't do this, we should not enact policies because of the fact that of this particular issue. With the election of Barack Obama instituted an aggressive carbon dioxide emissions policy. These emissions policy were enacted via Copenhagen, and they would actually decrease the carbon dioxide emission of the United States by 2025 by 26 to 28%, and by mid-century by 80%. With the election of Donald Trump actually reversed the Obama era policies, and the trajectory of the Obama era of the carbon emissions would plateau, and the plateau would just continue to mid-century. Those carbon footprint for the 2020 and beyond would not be as high as the carbon emissions for 2005. However, they would not be as low as they could have been by 80% by 2050. Now, with the election of Biden-Harris, we believe most of the policies for the Obama era have been reinstated. We have looked at the policy in which the U.S. hopes to lower its greenhouse gas emissions in terms of carbon dioxide. We can also look at, in fact, the greenhouse gas emissions for several countries. For example, Australia, here between the years of 1990 to 2018, 2005 to 2018, and also 2015 to 2018, which are depicted here. And when we look at these countries, we see that there are two countries that are outliers. China, which is undertaking a significant industrialization, and also India, which is also undertaking a very significant industrialization. And we see from 1990 to 2018, both India and China have gone a significant emission of greenhouse gases compared to, for example, Indonesia, Russia, Japan, and other similar countries. So we see that, in fact, there is a correlation, as has stated before, that between growth and greenhouse gas emissions over time. And in fact, many countries have significantly decreased their greenhouse gas emissions. For climate change, finally, I want to point out that many world economies are actually going to be on a downtrend in terms of their greenhouse gas emissions. And when we look at their emissions thus far, and in terms of their commitments that they're made in many international forums. Some economies have not made those commitments, including Russia, Australia, for example, based on trends, China, and also India. I also want to contrast that in terms of carbon dioxide emissions. So when we look at the world regions in which significant carbon dioxide emissions occurred between the years of 2000 and 2010, we see that the East Asia and Pacific region, and this is probably mostly due to China, there has been a significant increase in carbon dioxide emissions. In North America, this is primarily due to, of course, the United States. There has been a slight decrease due to the commitments that the United States have made. But again, other world regions, for example, in sub-Saharan Africa, there has been a slight increase. But North Africa, a slight increase compared to other world regions. But again, this has falls along the lines of the previous arguments that I've made, in that world powers have industrialized emitting carbon. Now, in terms of trying for many of these low and middle income countries that want to industrialize, the route that has been shown for industrialization is to emit carbon. So in terms of trying for rich countries to lecture to low and middle income countries that they should not emit carbon, has to fall on deaf ears. So there has to be an element of equity in terms of voices being heard, in terms of if the best way to industrialize without carbons, there has to be some other alternative. And there needs to be a discussion around how industrialization can occur if carbon neutral industrialization is going to be an option.